And now I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. We welcome your personal participation, Mr. President, in today's event. We thank the Secretary General of the UN for the informative briefing, and we also thank Ms. Lourdes Guale. We thank Mexico for drawing attention to the topic of today's debate. It is indeed very relevant, as the socioeconomic problems facing mankind have worsened significantly, and due to the coronavirus pandemic, they have become urgent, exposing vulnerabilities. Everywhere, even in the richest countries and regions, unequal distribution of wealth leads to widening inequalities, both within societies and at the international level. The situation is even more dire in those states that have never ceased lagging behind, have a difficult colonial past, or are unable to get rid of their debt burden. When people lose hope in the possibility of giving their children a better future, the result is often an exacerbation of ethnic, religious, and other divisions, and a struggle for power and resources. Mr. President, when the UN Security Council considers certain country situations, it cannot fail to take into account the root causes of conflict, which can be very diverse. However, when the Council discusses ways to overcome them, we should focus on using the tools that we have at our disposal: good offices, mediation, peacekeeping, and special political missions. Of course, the mandates of these missions can include certain goals pertaining to early peace building, capacity building assistance to state institutions, including law enforcement, and even quick impact projects. In addition, urgent humanitarian assistance is invaluable in alleviating the suffering of populations in need and consequently in reducing the severity of conflicts. During the transition from conflict to stability, the role of the Peace Building Commission and the Peace Building Fund is also particularly relevant. However, given the major socioeconomic development challenges which often exist in conflict and post-conflict states, this will in any case amount to no more than applying a Band-Aid. After all, neither the Security Council nor the Peace Building Commission possess the necessary tools to facilitate the formation of sustainable, independent economic models, ensure exchange of technologies, and infrastructure reinforcement, develop the manufacturing or agricultural sectors, education and health systems, or create jobs. When we discuss the theoretical links between human rights, development, peace, and security, it is necessary to be aware that development in and of itself cannot ensure peace. And peaceful life doesn't necessarily guarantee development. So it is important to not only consider the interlinkages, but also understand the differences between these processes, as well as which specific UN organ or entity is responsible for each of these areas. It is this logic that is behind our principled position on the need to adhere to the principle of division of labor between the principal organs of the UN. The issues of sustainable development, combating climate change, or protecting human rights should be considered first and foremost in specialized platforms that have the necessary tools and expertise, as well as universal or broad member state representation. And these platforms are first and foremost the General Assembly and ECOSOC. The same thinking is behind our doubts regarding a number of concepts proposed in the Secretary General's new initiative, Our Common Agenda, where we see a tendency to mix mandates, creating structures that duplicate charter bodies. This is fraught with a general decrease in the effectiveness of our global organization. The idea of using a so-called multi-stakeholder approach aimed at gradually equalizing the status of member states and non-state actors in the UN also raises a number of questions. In this regard, we call for a careful consideration of certain elements of the reform agenda in an intergovernmental format. Moreover, we are firmly convinced that their truly effective implementation can only be achieved on the basis of consensus decisions. We regret the unjustified haste of the proposal to adopt decisions in the General Assembly as soon as the day after tomorrow without proper consultations and clearly contrary to the goal of achieving consensus. We hardly believe that the goal of the Secretary General was to provoke a split among member states and to impose the will and understanding of one group of countries, however influential, on another. Mr. President, we believe that it is crucial for international assistance to states in solving whatever problems they face to be provided exclusively at their request and in close coordination with them, taking into account national priorities and contexts, including legal, historical, religious, and cultural ones. Each conflict situation requires its own approach. There can be no automatic formulas here. We oppose the introduction of certain universal indicators of conflicts or crises that could pave the way for various abuses. Decisions can only be based on the involvement of recipient states in dialogue with them. Departure from these principles, interventions in the internal affairs of states, and pressure on undesirable governments under the pretext of providing them with assistance, as well as humanitarian interventions in violation of international law, are unacceptable, and they are often the root causes of the emergence or exacerbation of conflicts, something that not all states present in this chamber today are ready to speak about frankly. Yet, if we do not call things by their proper names, the tragic situations facing a number of states, primarily in the Middle East, will repeat themselves. And no attractive concepts will be able to gloss over this fact. An even more pernicious practice is the use of unlawful unilateral sanctions or threat of their use, or the refusal to provide development assistance. These inhumane restrictions, especially in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, limit states' ability to overcome its impacts and undermine the efforts of legitimate governments to achieve sustainable development goals, which exacerbates inequality at the intergovernmental level and ultimately affects the well-being of innocent people. The example of Syria, for cooperation with which our American and European colleagues are prepared to punish both companies and countries alike, vividly demonstrates this trend and casts a shadow on any humanistic discussions about the nexus between peace and development. We call on all those involved to heed the corresponding appeal of the Secretary General and to stop this harmful practice. In conclusion, Mr. President, I cannot fail to mention our Estonian colleague found nothing better than to use the Security Council for yet another shaming of Belarus. May I remind you that the refugees on the border with Poland and Lithuania are seeking to get to Europe. They are not seeking to stay there. So who is creating the crisis, building fences with barbed wire and concentrating military at the border? You often recall full respect for the principles of international humanitarian law, but when it comes time to abide by them, you shift the responsibility to others. I would like to ask you a question. What is this Minsk failed policy in the Middle East that has led to the appearance of Syrian refugees on the borders with Poland and Lithuania? When the same thing was happening on the borders of other countries in the EU, or refugees were coming from other countries to the EU, your words were quite different indeed. And now you are threatening to introduce sanctions. Against whom and for what? Because you do not wish to accept the refugees that are seeking to come to you, to the European Union. It is time to stop shifting the blame here. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.